Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish them, and how they market them. We are on YouTube. You can find us. You have to search my name, Linda Maria Frank. I'm the author of Any Tillery Mysteries. My whole name, Linda Maria Frank, and you'll see my picture. Click on my picture, you'll get all of the interviews. We are also on Cablevision on Thursday, starting on October 1st at 2:30 on channel 20. We also have a Facebook page. If you wish to be on the show, you can message us through that page. Okay, so that's us. We're all over the place. Today's guest is Bob Martin, and Bob Martin is what I call a recidivist, which is a word that he's familiar with because he spent his years on the New York City Police Department. He's written a book called Bronx Justice, which we talked about the last time he was here, but today he's talking about a very special book, 9/11 Remembered 20 Years Later. Hi, Bob. Tell the audience something about yourself, please.
Hi, Linda. It's good to be with you again. It's a couple of years in between, but thank you for having me. As you said, I did 32 years with the NYPD. People ask me, where did you work? And it's usually easier to say where I didn't work in 32 years. Bronx detectives, Queens detectives. I was actually a mounted, rode horses for 4 years. Was in the tactical patrol force, the fabled tactical patrol force, the street crime unit, and 69th precinct in Brooklyn, the 72nd precinct in Brooklyn, and the 6th precinct in Greenwich Village. And that's pretty much my NYPD career.
Wow.
And I would mention, Linda, too, that I followed a father and a brother onto the job, and then my son came in after me. And we were approaching 100 years of service to the NYPD when my son switched over to the fire department, thanks be to God. And we hit 95.
Well, congratulations. That's a wonderful legacy to give to the world, and a wonderful ancestry to look back on. And but tell us about 9/11 Remember. Tell us about what inspired you to write the book, and whatever you'd like to say about it, because we have, you've provided me with some wonderful photographs from the book, and we're going to do a little PowerPoint presentation, and you're going to tell the story.
Okay, Linda. Really started, I guess, around January, kind of percolating in my brain because I knew the 20th anniversary was coming up. I really felt that these heroes, some who sacrificed their lives, some who made it through that day, but have now come down with different forms of cancer. The last I saw, there was 68 forms of cancer that people who worked down. And something I'll point out too, I always thought it was just the people who were at ground zero who were developing these diseases. But there's people who worked in Staten Island at the Great Kills landfill where they were bringing the debris, and they would have to rake through it looking for human remains, looking for identification and things. They also coming down, and also people who worked in the morgue, just going through people's clothing and that had it. So it's spreading like wildfire. We lost on 9/11 just shy of 3,000 people died that day, and we've lost more than 3,000 people in the 20 years since to these diseases they picked up working in one of those locations, or even in working in Shanksville, where no building came down, but I guess it was the jet fuel. A number of FBI people have come down with it, and also at the Pentagon. So it seemed like they were being forgotten. It seemed like there was a lot of anti-police feeling going around. And I said, let me remind people of some of the stories, of some of the heroism of that day.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that after 20 years, well, first of all, we have a whole new generation. Some of the young military people who are in Afghanistan who just came out weren't even born at 9/11. This is so hard for me to get my brain around, because to me it was like yesterday. And it is important to remember, because we've been through really some dark days lately, to remember the heroism of those days. And I know I watched all of the programs that were on TV this weekend. And one of the facts that I learned that I really didn't know, that I thought was so interesting, was the boats that went down to Lower Manhattan to rescue the people who had no other way to get back off the island. They rescued more people that day than were rescued from Dunkirk in World War II.
Yeah, I saw that. They say almost 500,000 people were carried from the island either to Ellis Island or over to Jersey. So it was quite, and I have, it's very hard to write anything with any kind of upbeat, but I have a little bit of a humorous story about one of the boats that was pressed into service. that we'll get to later when we show the
Okay.
photos.
You want to go to the,
Why don't we do that, Linda?
all right, sure. Here we go. Okay, just hang on just a second. Come on. There we are. Okay, so let me go to, there's
There
your
we go.
cover. This is a wonderful quote from Bill Bratton.
Yeah.
You want me to read it?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
And I could just tell you the quote, it's actually a quote within a quote, but the quote within the quote is from Admiral Bull Halsey from World War II. And Bratton talks about that, but you could read it, that'd be fine.
Yeah, I have a tiny little story about Admiral Bull Halsey. His ancestors came to Long Island in 1619, and there's a little house in Southampton that's a museum now that was their original house.
Like, I was going to say, though, it just dawns on me that the Halsey name is pretty familiar in the East End, right?
Yeah, well, that's where they settled from England. So
Okay.
anyway, in 9/11 Remembered, I am reminded of a favorite quotation. There are no great men, only ordinary men who, in response to extraordinary challenges, do great things. On 9/11 and the days that followed, thousands of men and women, heroes all, did great things. Bill Bratton, former NYPD police commissioner. So
yeah, I was very happy. As you may remember, he gave me a cover blurb for my first book, Bronx Justice, and then he gave me this. So I'm forever in his debt, and I will plug his. He has a book out now called The Profession, basically about his career in law enforcement. And he was the police commissioner in New York. He was the police chief in Boston. He was the police chief in LA. Quite a career, and he's been very kind to me, so I'd like to repay that. But when I contacted him and said I have another book, and he doesn't let me, I said, here's some suggestions. He goes, no, I'll write it. And he came up with this one, which I thought was great. The other thing I'll point out, Linda, that he says thousands of men and women. And when we get into the pictures, I'll show you, we have 3 women who are just extraordinary examples of heroism in the line of duty. 2 of them, unfortunately, who didn't go home after 9/11, and 1 who miraculously survived and is still on the NYPD to this day.
well, I'm going to give your book a little push. There are some very interesting and beautiful reviews in the beginning of the book, and the book is available on Kindle. So those of you who haven't read it, go for it. So I don't know if these are the 2 pictures you want. I put them all up. So if we need to.
Well, that's fine, because I know I could almost recite the book by heart now, Linda. It's a quick read. It's 80 some odd pages. But that picture is Moira Smith, who was the NYPD lost 23 people on 9/11. They've lost way over 300, approaching 350 now post 9/11. But Moira was the only female NYPD officer who died that day. And that's a very iconic photo next to it, which I was lucky enough the Daily News and the photographer gave me permission to use in the book. And that's Moira leading a bloodied broker out of the South Tower.
Oh,
Now, did she stay out? Did she put him in an ambulance and go to the hospital? No, she went back in and died probably minutes within that photo being taken.
wow. Sad, very sad. That's,
All right, this is interesting too. That's Moira Smith's shield. And it's now on display in the 9/11 museum. And as you can see from the photo, it's dented up, it's burnt, it took a beating. So the 9/11 museum has that and what we call your collar brass. So Moira was in the 13th precinct. So on the collar of her shirt or her uniform jacket should have little brass numerals 13. So the 9/11 museum thought enough of her to include that in the exhibit.
did they find her remains?
Yes, they did. It was a few months later. I think it might have been in March of 2002.
Yeah, okay. There we go. There's a bunch of people.
All right. I mentioned the morgue. If we start on the upper left-hand corner,
Okay.
that's a very good friend of mine named Leroy Dixon. Leroy and I worked together in the Tactical Patrol Force back in the through the 70s into the 80s. Leroy was about 6'4", 240 pounds. And I actually made Leroy a character in my first book, Bronx Justice. And he worked in the 83rd Precinct Detective Squad in Brooklyn. He had, of course, left uniform. Now he was a second-grade detective. And it was strange, Linda. It goes back to your show that I did 6 years ago. And we mentioned my friend Mike O'Keefe was also on the show that day. And I just met Mike that day after he scared the bejesus out of me with coming up, and he's, looks like a tribal warrior. And he said, "Are you Bob Martin?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm Mike O'Keefe." And it turns out, small world, not only were we on the same police force, but we also went to the same high school, St. Francis Prep in Brooklyn. But Michael had worked in the 83rd with Leroy. So I said to him, and the book had just come out, Bronx Justice, and I said to him, I made Leroy Dixon a character in the book. How do I get a hold of him? And Mike said, "You don't." He died post 9/11 cancer. And I ended up sending a copy of Bronx Justice to his wife, Rosa, and she wrote me back a note saying how pleased she was that I remembered him. And I said, "Well, stand by, because I have another book, 9/11, coming out, and Leroy will be in it." And then I asked Rosa, I said, "So was he at the Pile or in Staten Island?" She said, "No, he was working in the morgue." So he was the first one that it came to my attention. He died working in the morgue. The second gentleman, Jimmy Monahan, he worked with me in the street crime unit. He took more guns off the streets of the city in a month than most cops do in 20 years. Another post 9/11 victim. Next gentleman is a guy named Keith Ferrara, police officer. Keith and I were in the same karate dojo. You could hold the pop dummy, the blocking dummy. It was full of air, and Keith could put you through a wall when he kicked it. I actually helped get him into the mounted unit. And then I saw when they put out his death notice that he was no longer a mounted, so he could no longer ride the horses. He got so sick. And the last time I saw him, he had this full head of black hair, so he got very sick. The next one is really 3,000 people died that day, and we're looking at the top row now on the right. That smiling officer. 3,000 people died that day, and no one death grabs me as much as this man. His name was John Perry. He was a police officer in the 40th precinct in the Bronx. He spoke 5 languages. He was an attorney, and he was at one police plaza that day retiring because he was going to open his own law practice. So basically, he's going out the door. And when the planes hit, he decided that he wanted to be there, and he ran over and never came out. And I've said to people, I don't know, if I was there that day in one police plaza, I might have said, "You know what, there's 36,000 cops on this department. I don't think they'll miss me." But he went, and he had the whole future, looking up for him. So his death really grabbed me.
John Perry is an alumnus of Seaford High School, where I worked for 30 years. And every year we remember John Perry. And actually, we have a scholarship fund, and we give 5 seniors scholarships in remembrance of John Perry and 4 other alumni who we lost. So we remember him every year.
That's small world. Also, I did the Sid and Bernie show last week, and right before I did it, ex-Congressman King was on, and he was talking about Seaford High School. I guess he's from that area there, right? And he was talking about some of the firefighters from Seaford who died. But I didn't know that John was from Seaford. But I said, I didn't know him at all. And some of the other people who will describe, I did know who died. But it's like, oh my God, I wish I could have said, "Don't go. You don't have to go." Yeah. But that was the way he was. So I'm glad you honored him. I know the International Chiefs of Police honored him not that long ago, too. So he shall not be forgotten. And that was the whole reason for writing the book, that all of these people should not be forgotten. All right, then if we go down to the bottom column, on my left anyway, the smiling fella in uniform with all of the medals, a guy named Pete Moog. And Pete and I go back 40 some odd years. I played for 12 years. I was a charter member of the NYPD football team. I was getting a little long in the tooth in the 80s. I played till 84. And Pete was a fresh out of the academy rookie. I think 82 was his first year. He had played college ball, came from Staten Island, was fast, strong, wasn't the biggest guy, but he could move. And I kind of took him under my wing on the football team. And it turns out on 9/11, Pete was in a unit we call TARU, the Technical Assistance Response Unit. And they provide all sorts of mechanical and electronic devices if there's a hostage situation, things like that. So Pete was in Staten Island. He had just dropped his kids off at school, and he was going into a diner for breakfast. His beeper went off, if you remember beepers, and he called the office, and they told him a plane just hit the Trade Center. Everybody is to report to Liberty and West Street. So Pete grabbed his department auto with all of the gear, and he had just been given a brand new car, a 2001 Ford Taurus station wagon, because he had had an accident with his previous car. So he says he goes down, and as he's going through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, the second tower gets hit. And as he's going down West Street, he says it's horrible. He sees body parts. He sees this big hunk of metal, which he later finds out is one of the engines. And he's worried about his car. So he pulls it down Liberty Street all the way to the end. So it's almost at the Hudson River to protect it. He gets out of the car. And as I said, they had sophisticated equipment. So he had some good binoculars, and he looks up and he describes the people jumping, and it just breaks your heart. And you wonder how these people who survived don't wake up screaming every night. He sees two young girls, blondes, they hug each other, and then they step off holding hands. So that's not going to go away. He's going to set up, try to tap into the telephone lines of the Vista Hotel across the street. And as he's walking over to it, he hears this rumbling. And the next thing you know, he's propelled. And a lot of people might not realize this, Linda, but when those towers came down, the force, the wind gusts, picked up police cars, ambulances, fire trucks, and tossed them around. So human beings were thrown. He was thrown across West Street. And as you may see from the picture, he's not a skinny little guy. He's thrown across West Street, and he's actually trapped under one of the pedestrian walkways that goes across West Street. He says it's pitch black. You can't breathe. There's 10 other cops trapped under there, and the debris is piling up. They have the glass wall of the World Financial Center behind them, and they're banging on it, trying to break it to get in. And Pete actually says, I was thinking about pulling my gun and shooting it, but I was afraid I'd get in trouble. He says, I'm dying, and I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. But someone else didn't feel that way. They pulled their 9mm. They put 3 rounds into the glass wall, and it didn't shatter, but it made a hole big enough for them to crawl into the building. They took a couple of deep breaths. Pete went back out again. And if you see some of those films, the documentaries, you'll hear this chirping sound when the first tower and the second tower falls. And basically that's the firemen have these passive alarms that if they don't move for a period of time, I don't know if it's 30 seconds or 1 minute, you hear this, sounds like a cricket almost. And Pete says, we hear this cricket, and him and his partner are digging through the rubble, trying to find this fireman, and then the north tower comes down. He's propelled across the street again into an underground parking garage where he slams into a car. And he says the car looks like it got hit by a truck. He finds out much later that he broke his hip when this happened. But he goes out and again tries to help people. And then he runs into a girl who's kind of the hero of the story, who's over on the right, but I'll get to her in a minute, Terry Tobin. And he helps her get down to the boats. But the story I mentioned before, Linda, was Pete's been around the block a few times. So they go down to the North Cove of the World Financial Center, which has some pretty impressive yachts there. And Pete says there's like 1,000 people waiting to get on boats, and there's only 6 or 7 boats running at that time. Later, as you mentioned, the giant armada comes in, all of the New York Waterways boats, all of the
retired fireboats.
Retired fireboat, the fishing boats from Sheepshead Bay came over. But at the time, there were only a couple of boats running. And Pete says, I know rich people leave their keys in their yachts a lot. So I see a 70-foot yacht. I hop on deck. I take a look into the cabin, and I see keys on that little floating buoy that most boaters have in case they drop the keys overwater. So Pete says, so I get into the boat. I didn't ask him how he got in. And then he gets off, and there's an NYPD harbor launch pulling in next to him, and Pete knows one of the guys on board. And he goes, hey, Swabby, you got a new boat. And he throws him the keys, and the guy got in, started it up, and he also was part of the armada going back and forth. But the thing I'd like to point out is at no point did any of these people say, I'm done. 2 towers just came down on top of me.
Well, that's the lesson. But Bob, I'm going to give you a warning. There's only 7 more minutes left.
Okay, so we'll go through them quick. The next guy is a guy named Bobby Nicosia, who worked with Pete, died post 9/11. John Russo worked with Pete, died post 9/11. The star of the show, Terry Tobin. She was a lieutenant at the time. She's now a 3-star chief. She's still working. And her story is unbelievable. The fact that she's still alive defies all odds. She was a lieutenant in the Deputy Commissioner of Public Information working at Wynn Police Plaza. And for the folks who aren't familiar with it, Wynn Police Plaza is a very short walk to the World Trade Center.
Right.
So when the first plane hits, she goes over there. She sees the second plane hit, or she describes the debris coming down. She also describes the jumpers. And just by a chance meeting, she sees a first deputy commissioner at the time, a great guy named Joe Dunn, who says to her, Terry, there's a report of a third plane in the area. Grab a helmet from emergency service. So she goes to the emergency service truck and gets the heavy duty Kevlar helmet. It's not the plastic helmet. This is Kevlar bullet resistant helmet. And she puts it on. She's standing at the foot of the South Tower when it comes down. She's blown across West Street. I mean, that's 6 lanes, so it's got to be 60 feet. And I'd love to know how fast they were traveling. She ends up on the other side in front of the World Financial Center, buried up to her waist in debris. It's pitch black. She can't breathe. And she feels and hears something hit her helmet. The helmet falls off. It's cracked in half. This is a bullet-resistant helmet that should stop a .44 caliber bullet. She reaches up and she has a 4-inch piece of concrete embedded in her skull, and she's bleeding down her neck.
Oh my God.
Eventually, she's wiggling, trying to get free, and she feels a man's hand next to her, and she says, don't worry, mister, I'm NYPD. We're going to get you out of here. And when it clears enough, she sees that she's holding onto a hand and an arm. It's not attached to a body. She gets herself out. She starts digging a fireman out who was trapped under an ambulance. They get him out. The North Tower goes down. She runs. She gets hit in the face, hit in the back, rather, with a piece of glass. She doesn't know what it is. She goes into Battery Park City Apartments. She starts organizing people there to get them down to the boats. And that's where she runs into my man, Pete Moog. And she says, Pete, help me. We got to get these people down to the boats. And he says, Terry, we got to get you down to the boats. You got a piece of concrete in your head and you got a 2 feet piece of plate glass sticking out of your back. So eventually they get her on a boat. They get her over to Ellis Island where they were doing triage. They get her to a hospital in Jersey. The doctors say, we got good news and bad news. We're taking you right up to surgery. We're going to take care of your back and your head. We can't give you any anesthesia because you have a severe concussion. And also you have a severely broken ankle that we can't set or cast because it's already swollen and cut up. She gets treated, gets 80 stitches. Her brother picks her up and she says, take me back to the Trade Center. And she goes back to the Trade Center. She sees she can't help. And then she goes back to her office in 1PP. I said to her, it was like you went out for a cup of coffee or something, you came back. But just an outstanding woman. And if anybody, either or the 2 people who have been running for mayor, if you wanted to look at your next police commissioner, you should take a good look at Terry. All right, what do we got next, Linda?
Well, do you want to go to this because you only have 4 minutes left?
Okay, excellent. So we mentioned Moira Smith before. Moira's husband, Jim Smith, NYPD, and that's her, at the time, 2-year-old daughter, Patricia. And they were getting the NYPD Medal of Honor in December of 2001 from Mayor Giuliani. And it's a very iconic photo of this little girl getting the award. And you see, that's it hanging around her neck, that green ribbon. And I mentioned it to a friend of mine, Peggy Harrington, about 2 weeks ago. She asked me about the book, and I told her, and when I mentioned Moira Smith, she gasped and said, I was so impressed with that picture, so taken, that 20 years ago, I wrote a poem. So with your permission, I will read that.
Yes, please.
Your father holds your hand as you stride across the stage. In the glare of footlights, a little finger in your mouth, your head down, eyes looking away. One shiny black shoe is frozen midair near the hem of your skirt. A wide green ribbon with a gold star, too big for you, hangs almost to the hem of your red satin dress. The brim of your father's hat hides his face as he looks down at you. He worries that you're going to cry, frightened by the sound of applause. You feel the tightening of the grip of his white gloved hand. Your father looks strong in his uniform, just as your mother did. You can't find her, no matter where you look. You sobbed as your father arranged your hair this morning, fixing in place the barrette that now gleams in the photographer's flash. Peggy Harrington. So the first time I read that on a podcast, I couldn't get through it. I had to stop and start again. But the little girl is 22 now. She graduated from the University of Alabama as an athletic trainer, and I believe she's working at Tulane University now.
Good for her. Good for her. Okay, I know you wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, when I started to write the book, I said, I can't make a dime off this, telling these other people, these hero stories. So The 3256 Foundation was started to honor Sergeant Michael Curtin, a Marine Corps combat veteran from Desert Storm. Also was one of the first responders out to Oklahoma City in '95, and he died at the Trade Center on 9/11, leaving his Marine Corps wife and 3 young girls. And his cousin, who runs the foundation, Mike Finnegan, was a friend of mine. So I said, you know, how about we team up, and any money we make on the book will go to the 3256 Foundation. So that's what we did. This was a golf outing that they have every year. We sold some books out there. And do you have that other one, the card, Linda? Just the card with the foundation?
Yes, I do. I do.
Okay.
I do. Let me get over here.
And that is the 3256 Foundation. As you see, they have the Marine Corps logo, the ESU logo, and a sergeant shield, and that gives the information. If somebody's feeling generous post 9/11 and they want to write a check, just write it to that address in Laurel, and it'll be going to a very good cause. So if we have any time left, Linda, I'd just like to read the inscription that I put into the book. Do we have time?
Yes, we do.
All right, so this is the dedication. To the World Trade Center responders, this book could only be dedicated to those who served, who ran into those burning towers, knowing the danger, but were determined to help others to do their jobs, who were there that day and the hundreds of days that followed, those who lived, those who died, their families and friends. Then I have a biblical quote. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends if you do whatever I command. John 15:12-14, King James Version. And I put, with apologies to King James and John, I would update verse 13 to read, greater love hath no man or woman than this, that they lay down their life for their friends.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's been such a pleasure to have you. I know that being a lifelong New Yorker, 9/11 is very special to me. It's a tough time. And it's great to see that people are remembering the good things, remembering the good things that people have done. And I thank you so much for being on the program.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I thank you. And hopefully I'll see you again in a couple of years when my next book comes out, Linda.
I hope so. Keep writing. Take care.
Thank you so much, Linda.
You're welcome.